So thank you for that introduction. As you said, I was actually the health spokesperson through most of the pandemic and became education spokesperson in October last year, but have taken a keen interest in education. It's one of the reasons why I'm a Liberal Democrat and why I wanted to get into politics, and very engaged with, as most MPs are, with local schools in my constituency. So I'm delighted to be covering this brief and feel like I've been trying to challenge the government right the way through the pandemic, not just on their approach to how they handled things from a public health point of view, but also from an education point of view, because frankly, I'm dismayed that children, young people, parents, school staff, to my mind, have been an afterthought for the government throughout the pandemic. There was no clear plan for safe school reopenings after the first lockdown, or even after the second lockdown, I don't think. And last minute changes in guidance, talking to teachers and head teachers going into schools, just frustration at, a few hours notice, sometimes 24 hours notice, having to implement new guidance, sometimes, on the eve of a holiday, just as they're trying to have a break, to then have to implement new guidance on their return. We saw that the late and slow issuance of devices to those children, young people who don't have access to devices to learn from home, or indeed to the internet. And of course, they've been very late and all over the place on exams, which has caused all sorts of anxiety for pupils who, and indeed for teachers, needing to know what on earth to be teaching their pupils. And all the while, what I have been horrified by is that I felt that teachers have been an easy target for the media. I think we've, obviously, quite rightly, we have praised our health and care workers and many key workers, and I felt the media were often targeting teachers, and I know how hard teachers have been working right the way through, and indeed school governors, because they have to sign off on a lot of the new processes and procedures that are put in place as a result of DfE guidance coming out at short notice. So I really recognise that it's been a really tough time for our teachers, who've done an extremely, have done a phenomenal job. The thing that really upsets me is that we haven't had the mitigations in place that should have been put in place months and months ago. I mean, you think back to quite early on in the pandemic, there were many experts talking about ventilation and air purification, and we saw Germany and the US put air purifiers, for instance, in a lot of their schools quite early on. We now have belatedly a derisory 8,000 purifiers being issued across over 300,000 classrooms. My recent experience of going into schools, I was actually shivering in one classroom with windows open, because children and young people are trying to learn, and teachers trying to teach in really cold environments, not to mention the energy bills that's creating in terms of hot air going out of the classroom with energy prices rising. And yet we're being told by Nadhim Zahawi that we can only have air purifiers in classrooms that are breaching what I think, not just breaching safe limits, but actually the limit is put at too high a level in terms of the particulates that have to be found in the air, in terms of what you see on your CO2 monitors. CO2 monitors were issued late. Many schools still don't have them. So I don't quite understand how they are implementing the criteria for being able to access air purifiers. And we just need to look at the pupil absence rates and the teacher absence and school staff absence rates in recent weeks to see that clearly COVID is circulating at high levels in our classrooms. And those that have been fortunate enough to qualify for air purifiers aren't getting them until later this month. This is all far too late and far too restrictive. I've been calling, and the Liberal Democrats have been calling, for an air purifier in every classroom. We think that would cost less than what it is cost, or about the price, half the price of the royal yacht that Boris Johnson has committed himself to. And I think this is a small price to pay when you think about the vast sums spent on the pandemic, not least on unusable PPE and fraud that's being written off by the Treasury. Just briefly, because I know I've only got a few minutes, I wanted to talk about obviously the impact of lockdowns and high absence rates throughout the pandemic, and in terms of the COVID recovery for our children and young people. Clearly, we've seen from all the data, and I've particularly been following the Education Policy Institute research on this, around how the disadvantage gap has clearly widened for those who were, the most, who are the poorest in terms of their academic progress, and it's fueled the mental health crisis amongst our children and young people, which was appalling before the pandemic. It's got even worse, and I would say when I go out and about to my local schools, it's the #1 issue that head teachers are raising with me, and I'm really very concerned, and spoke about this in the House of Commons last week during Children's Mental Health Week. So in terms of the recovery package that the government's put in place, it's only a third of what Sir Kevin Collins recommended. Liberal Democrats have been calling for the full 15 billion to be honoured. We see it as an investment spend, so we would class it as capital expenditure rather than revenue, which allows the government to borrow. And we would see that our view is that about 10 billion of that catch-up fund should be put directly into the hands of schools to spend as they see fit on their pupils. They know their pupils best, and 5 billion of that actually into the hands of parents and carers in the form of catch-up vouchers, which could be used for tuition, it could be used for extracurricular activity, whether that's swimming or art or something else, or indeed for counselling if that's needed in terms of well-being and mental health. And just briefly on the mental health point, I've been calling for some time for a counsellor in every school, for community hubs, one-stop shops for young people, and for actually a much more joined up approach across both the health service and our education system in terms of mental health support for our children and young people. I just wanted to finish by saying a massive thank you to our teachers, school staff, to school governors, and to local councillors who've been supporting schools in their patch. You've all done a phenomenal job. I'm sorry that you haven't been recognised in the way that I think you should be by government and many in the media. But thank you for taking care of our children. I'm the mother of 2 young children, and I see the impact even in a relatively privileged and affluent position that my constituents and I myself find myself in. I see the impact in terms of well-being on children day to day, and I'm so grateful to all of you for everything you do.